Workers in Amsterdam earned wages that would have made them middle class in other countries. Even Dutch peasants lived better than most European nobles. This wealth was visible everywhere. Amsterdam was filled with grand canal houses, some 5 stories tall, with facades of imported marble and windows of expensive glass. The Dutch consumed luxuries that were unimaginable elsewhere. Tulips, paintings, spices, silk, porcelain from China, furniture made from tropical hardwoods. The Dutch golden age of painting, Rembrandt, Vermeer, Frans Hals, was funded by this wealth. Every merchant wanted his portrait painted. Every guild hall was decorated with masterpieces. But the real power wasn't the paintings or the houses or even the ships. The real power was financial. The Dutch had perfected credit. The Bank of Amsterdam operated with a fractional reserve system that allowed it to lend out far more money than it held in deposits. This created liquidity. It meant capital was available for investment. If you wanted to start a business, build a ship, or finance a trade voyage, Amsterdam had the money to lend. And because the guilder was the reserve currency, the Dutch could borrow at the lowest interest rates in the world. The Dutch government could issue bonds at 3 to 4% interest. France and Spain were paying 8 to 12%. This differential meant the Dutch could finance their military and infrastructure for half the cost of their rivals. In 1650, the Dutch looked invincible. A tiny nation of 2 million people had become the wealthiest and most powerful financial center in history. But the system had a fatal flaw. It was entirely dependent on trade. The Dutch didn't produce much themselves. They were middlemen. They bought goods from Asia, Africa, and the Americas, and sold them to Europe at a markup. They borrowed money from savers and lent it to merchants at a higher rate. They transported goods on their ships and charged for shipping. Every guilder of Dutch wealth came from facilitating transactions, not from producing goods. This made the Dutch incredibly rich, but it also made them vulnerable. If anything disrupted trade, if shipping routes were closed, if foreign markets were cut off, the entire system would collapse. And that's exactly what happened. The Dutch had won their independence from Spain in 1648 after 80 years of war. This was called the 80 Years' War, and it had been expensive. But the Dutch had managed to finance it through loans and taxation without crippling their economy. By 1650, the war was over. Spain had recognized Dutch independence. The Dutch Republic was free, wealthy, and powerful. They should have consolidated. They should have focused on paying down their war debts and strengthening their position. Instead, they made a catastrophic mistake. They kept fighting. Between 1652 and 1784, the Dutch fought 4 wars with England. They fought wars with France. They fought wars with Sweden. They were in an almost constant state of conflict for over 100 years. Why? Because trade routes were everything. When England started building its own merchant fleet, it threatened Dutch shipping monopolies. When France tried to dominate the Spanish Netherlands, it threatened Dutch security. Every conflict was about protecting trade, controlling shipping lanes, and maintaining access to markets. And every war was ruinously expensive. The first major blow was the First Anglo-Dutch War from 1652 to 1654. This was a naval war fought entirely over trade. England had passed the Navigation Acts in 1651, which required all goods imported to England to be carried on English ships. This was a direct attack on Dutch shipping dominance. The Dutch couldn't accept this, so they went to war. The war lasted 2 years. It was fought with massive naval battles in the North Sea and the English Channel. The Dutch held their own, but the war was incredibly costly. Building and maintaining warships required enormous sums. Replacing lost ships, paying sailors, equipping armies, all of this consumed money at a rate the Dutch had never experienced during peacetime. The cost was approximately 18 million guilders. To put that in perspective, the entire annual revenue of the Dutch government was about 12 million guilders. The war cost more than an entire year of government income. To finance it, the Dutch borrowed heavily. Government bonds were issued, taxes were raised, but the economy was strong, so the debt was manageable. This was the first step down a path that would destroy the Republic. The Second Anglo-Dutch War from 1665 to 1667 was even more expensive. This time, the conflict was broader. England wanted to seize Dutch colonies in North America and the Caribbean. The Dutch wanted to protect their trade dominance. The war involved massive naval engagements, including the famous raid on the Medway in 1667, where the Dutch fleet sailed up the Thames River, burned English ships, and towed away the flagship of the Royal Navy. It was one of the most humiliating defeats in English history. But again, the Dutch paid a heavy price. The Second Anglo-Dutch War cost approximately 30 million guilders. That was 2.5 times the annual revenue of the Dutch government. To finance this war, the Dutch went deeper into debt. The government issued more bonds. Provincial authorities borrowed from local banks. Private citizens